Alien girl hid beneath the human's porch after the quake. Her first soft word became the twist. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. The earth trembled beneath his feet, a low rumble that seemed to come from deep within the planet itself. The earthquake had struck without warning, shaking the small suburban neighborhood to its very core. Windows shattered, walls cracked, and the streets were strewn with debris. James Miller, a regular man living a quiet life, had just finished his morning coffee when the ground started to shake. His heart raced as he scrambled to secure his home, moving quickly to check for any damage. With a deep sigh, he realized his old wooden porch had suffered the most. It creaked and groaned under the strain of the tremors, but it was still standing. That was when he heard it. A faint rustling sound came from beneath the porch, followed by a soft whimper, almost like a cry for help. James immediately knelt down, peering through the cracks in the floorboards. His eyes widened when he saw a figure, an alien girl, her skin a pale shade of green, her body huddled in the dirt, shivering from the shock of the earthquake. Her wide, terrified eyes met his gaze, and for a moment, they simply stared at each other. She was unlike anything he had ever seen before, her delicate features, her silvery hair, and the aura of vulnerability surrounding her. James felt a surge of protectiveness he couldn't explain. He carefully extended a hand toward her, offering her the warmth and safety of his home. "Are you okay?" he asked gently, his voice soft and calming. The girl seemed hesitant at first, but as he reached out further, she slowly took his hand, pulling herself up from the rubble. Her body was thin, frail, and James noticed how she winced as she stood. It was clear she had been through something traumatic. She whispered, her voice barely audible, her words shaky as though she wasn't sure how to communicate with him. "What's your name?" James asked, his heart aching for her. The alien girl hesitated for a long moment, glancing around as though searching for the right words, her eyes never leaving him. And then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, she spoke. "Lyra," she said. Her first word, a simple name, but it carried the weight of so much more. James had no idea what had brought her here, or what she had been through, but in that moment, he made a promise to himself that he would protect her, no matter what. Little did he know, Lyra's arrival was only the beginning of a journey that would change both of their lives forever. James gently helped Lyra step into his small living room, his heart racing as he guided her carefully, trying to keep his movements slow and comforting. She was fragile, her body trembling from both the quake and the shock of the situation. Her eyes darted nervously around the room, as if every corner held some unseen danger. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the floorboards underfoot. He motioned for her to sit on the couch, and she hesitated before slowly lowering herself onto the cushions, her eyes still wide with unease. James took a seat across from her, keeping a respectful distance. He didn't want to overwhelm her. Her alien features, the pale green skin, the large expressive eyes, and silvery hair, were striking, but it was the fear in her eyes that stood out the most. She was clearly not from this world, yet she had been left here, in his house, after the earthquake. He couldn't help but wonder what had brought her here. What had happened to her? James ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He had no idea how to help her, no idea what she needed, but something deep inside told him he had to try. He cleared his throat softly, hoping to ease the tension. "Lyra," he said gently, "are you hungry? I can make you something to eat if you want." She looked at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to understand the meaning behind his words. She seemed to be struggling with the concept, perhaps unfamiliar with human customs. Then, she nodded slowly, almost hesitantly. "Food?" she asked, her voice soft, still shaky. "Yes," James replied, rising from the couch. "I'll fix something. It'll help you feel better." As he moved toward the kitchen, he glanced back at her. She was still sitting there, her hands resting in her lap, her gaze lost in thought. He felt a pang of sympathy for her. She had been through so much already, and he had no idea what kind of life she had led before all of this. But he knew one thing. He couldn't just leave her alone. He had to do something to help. He opened the fridge and pulled out some leftovers from the night before. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. He set the small plate down on the kitchen counter and started warming it up. The hum of the microwave filled the quiet air, a strange comfort in the otherwise tense atmosphere. As the minutes ticked by, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this strange encounter, was the beginning of something bigger. But what? He wasn't sure yet. Once the food was ready, he placed it carefully on a tray, along with a glass of water. When he returned to the living room, Lyra was still sitting on the couch, her eyes now focused on the tray of food in his hands. She didn't say anything, but her gaze softened as he set it down in front of her. James hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. But then Lyra looked up at him, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you," she said, her first full sentence. The words were small, but they were enough. The gratitude in her voice struck James deeply. He smiled gently, his heart swelling with an unexpected warmth. "You're welcome, Lyra. I'm just glad you're safe." He watched as she picked up the spoon, her movements careful, as though unsure of how to use the utensil. James chuckled softly, feeling a little lighter. "Here," he said, reaching into the drawer for a fork. "This might be easier." Lyra looked at the fork, then at him, her brow furrowed. "What is this?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity now. James grinned. "It's a fork. You use it to eat. I know it's a little strange, but it'll help." She took the fork tentatively, her fingers wrapping around it carefully, as if it were something fragile. She took a bite of the food, chewing slowly, her expression unreadable. James sat back, watching her, giving her the space she needed. It wasn't long before she finished her meal, and when she set the fork down, she looked up at him again. "This is good," she said, her voice still soft, but filled with wonder. "I'm glad you like it," James replied. "You can stay here as long as you need. You're safe now." Lyra seemed to consider his words for a moment, and then, as if making a decision, she looked at him with a kind of resolve in her eyes. I want to stay," she said. Her voice, though quiet, was steady now. "I want to learn." James nodded, his heart lifting at her words. "Of course. You can learn whatever you want. I'll help however I can." In that moment, he realized that he wasn't just helping her out of kindness. She had already started to change him, to make him question everything he thought he knew about the world. And maybe, just maybe, this was the start of something beautiful. Something he couldn't yet understand, but he was ready to find out. The next few days passed in a quiet routine. James and Lyra spent their time getting to know each other, slowly forming a bond that neither had anticipated. James showed her the small joys of human life, things she had never experienced before. Simple pleasures like cooking together, reading books, and even just sitting on the porch watching the sunset. Lyra, for her part, was eager to learn. She absorbed everything James taught her with a curiosity that was both refreshing and humbling. She learned to use human utensils properly, to speak more confidently, and to understand the world around her. She had an insatiable curiosity about human culture and customs, and James was more than happy to share. He found himself smiling more than he had in years. It was strange, he thought, how quickly his life had changed. One moment, everything had been normal, and the next, he had an alien girl hiding beneath his porch after an earthquake. Yet, as the days passed, he couldn't imagine his life without her. She wasn't just some alien. She was a person, and a kind one at that. Her gentle nature and thirst for knowledge made her more relatable than many of the humans he had met. He often found himself looking at her, marveling at how she could look so different and yet be so similar to him. One afternoon, as the two of them sat in the kitchen preparing lunch, Lyra asked him about Earth's history. She was fascinated by how humans had come to dominate the planet, build civilizations, and travel to the stars. James paused, a bit taken aback by the question. "Well," he began, "we didn't start out that way. There were many challenges along the way, but we learned from our mistakes. We fought wars, built great empires, and then tore them down. And in the process, we learned about ourselves." Lyra nodded, her eyes focused intently on him. "And you don't regret it? All the war, the suffering?" she asked. James thought for a moment, then shook his head. "No, I don't regret it. The mistakes we made were part of who we are. They shaped us into something better. If we hadn't faced those hardships, we wouldn't be who we are today. Lyra was quiet for a moment, absorbing his words. I see, she said softly, her voice thoughtful. We are the same, then. My people. We have had our own struggles, but we have learned too. James smiled at her. Yeah, maybe we're not so different after all. Lyra returned his smile, her eyes lighting up. Maybe not. As they continued with their meal, the world outside seemed to fade away. The noise of the city, the worries, everything that had once seemed so important no longer mattered. In that moment, it was just the two of them, sharing a meal, sharing a life, and building something new together. James realized that, despite the strange circumstances, he was no longer just helping Lyra. She had become a part of his world, and he had become a part of hers. They were no longer two beings from different worlds. They were simply two people, finding their way in this vast, mysterious universe. As the days passed, James began to notice the subtle ways Lyra was changing. Her confidence was growing, and she seemed to be adapting to life on Earth in a way that both amazed and humbled him. She was learning how to communicate better, how to navigate the small, everyday things that made up his life. It wasn't just the practical skills, cooking, using utensils, managing the household, but something deeper. Lyra was learning to trust, to open up, to be human in ways she hadn't before. James didn't realize how much he had missed simple human connection until Lyra came into his life. She had a way of making everything feel more meaningful. Even small things, like sharing a laugh or sitting together in the evening, became moments he cherished. One evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the stars, Lyra turned to him with a question that had been on her mind for some time. James, she began, her voice soft. Why do humans help each other? Why do you help me? James looked at her, surprised by the depth of her question. He hadn't really thought about it before, not in those terms. I guess it's just in us, he said, shrugging. I mean, we don't always get it right, but we try to help each other because it's the right thing to do. We help because we care. Lyra nodded slowly, as if the words were sinking in. She looked up at the sky, her eyes distant, as if she were processing everything she had learned in such a short time. Where I come from, she said quietly, helping someone isn't always seen as a good thing. It's often seen as a weakness. James frowned, confused. Why? That doesn't make sense. Lyra gave him a small, sad smile. Because in my world, strength is everything. We are taught to take care of ourselves first, to show no weakness. She looked at him then, her eyes intense, almost searching. But you, James, you help me. You don't see me as weak. James felt a pang of something deep in his chest. He hadn't realized how much of an impact his actions had on her. He reached out, gently taking her hand in his. Lyra, he said softly, I don't see weakness in you. I see someone who's been through a lot and is still standing. That's strength. You're stronger than you think. Lyra looked down at their hands, her fingers curling around his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The world around them was quiet, save for the soft rustling of leaves in the wind. James could feel the weight of her words, the weight of her past, pressing down on her. But he also felt something else, a glimmer of hope, of something beautiful starting to grow between them. As the days turned into weeks, James and Lyra's bond deepened. They spent more time together, learning from each other, sharing stories of their pasts. Lyra told James about her home world, about her people, their customs, and the struggles they faced. James, in turn, shared the history of Earth, the lessons humanity had learned, and the ways they had fought to build a better future. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when Lyra's past would resurface, when the weight of her trauma would threaten to pull her under. But James was always there, offering a steady hand, a listening ear. And slowly, Lyra began to heal. It was in these quiet, intimate moments that James realized just how much he had come to care for her. She wasn't just a stranger from another world. She was his friend, his companion, someone who had become as important to him as anyone he had ever known. One night, after a long day of working on some repairs around the house, James came inside to find Lyra sitting at the kitchen table, looking down at something in her hands. It was an old book, one of the few he had left from his childhood. He smiled, walking over to her. That's an old one, he said softly, looking over her shoulder. My mom used to read that to me when I was little. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes filled with something he couldn't quite read. I like it, she said quietly. It's comforting. It reminds me that there's more to life than just survival. James sat down beside her, watching as she carefully turned the pages. Yeah, he said softly, there's a lot more. For the first time since they had met, Lyra seemed at peace, her mind free from the constant worries that had haunted her for so long. And in that moment, James knew that they were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They were something more, a family, in their own way. And no matter what came next, they would face it together. Weeks passed, and with each day, James and Lyra grew closer. Their bond had evolved from one of mere necessity to something deeper, something unspoken but understood. James had always been someone who kept to himself, preferring the quiet routine of his life. But with Lyra, everything had changed. Her presence had breathed new life into his home, his world, and perhaps even into himself. The way she laughed, the way she looked at the stars with wonder, and how she had started to trust him. It all made him realize that there was more to life than just existing. One evening, after a day of exploring the nearby woods, James and Lyra found themselves sitting on the porch once again. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the cool evening air wrapped around them like a blanket. James was cleaning the tools they had used, his hands moving automatically, while Lyra sat next to him, her eyes gazing at the sky. James, she said, her voice soft but steady. I've been thinking. He looked up from the tools, noticing the serious look on her face. What's on your mind? She hesitated for a moment, as though weighing her words carefully. When I first came here, I didn't understand humans. I didn't understand your ways, your kindness. Where I come from, showing vulnerability is weakness. But now I see things differently. I see that helping each other is not a sign of weakness. It's strength. James smiled softly, his heart warming at her words. You've learned a lot in a short time, Lyra. She smiled back, her eyes shining with a mixture of pride and something deeper, perhaps hope. I owe it to you, she said quietly. If it weren't for you, I would still be hiding, alone, scared. The weight of her words hit James in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't just grateful. She was beginning to believe in something he had taken for granted, the power of human kindness. You're stronger than you think, James replied, his voice gentle but firm. And you don't owe me anything. You've taught me a lot, too. Lyra turned to him, her gaze softening. What have I taught you? She asked, genuinely curious. James thought for a moment, then shrugged. To appreciate the small things, he said with a half-smile, and to see the world in a new light. Lyra considered his words, nodding slowly. I've learned that too. It's strange, she said, almost to herself, how something so simple can be so profound. The silence between them felt comfortable now, filled with the understanding that had slowly formed over the past few weeks. James looked at Lyra, really looked at her, and in that moment, he saw more than just the alien girl who had stumbled into his life. He saw someone who was learning, growing, and perhaps, for the first time in her life, beginning to feel at home. They sat there for a long time, watching the stars in silence, each lost in their thoughts, but both content in the presence of the other. For James, it was a feeling he hadn't known he was missing, a connection, not just to another person, but to the world around him. And for Lyra, it was the beginning of something she had never thought possible, a sense of belonging. As the evening wore on, they went inside, their hearts lighter than they had been before. There was still so much to learn, so much to understand about each other, but James knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone anymore. And neither was she. Days turned into weeks, and the world around James and Lyra continued to shift. The bond between them had only deepened, transforming from mere companionship to something more profound. Lyra, once a stranger, was now a part of his life, and he had become a steady presence in hers. Together, they had found a kind of peace in the chaos of their worlds. One evening, as the first crisp winds of fall began to blow, James and Lyra stood outside on the porch, looking out over the distant hills. The landscape had changed since the earthquake. What had once been a peaceful, sleepy town now felt alive with the energy of recovery and rebuilding. But even amidst the changes, there was still a sense of calm in the air. Lyra had grown stronger. She no longer hid behind her uncertainty and fear. She was more confident, more open. And James could see the changes in himself too. He had found purpose again, one he hadn't realized he was missing until Lyra had come into his life. "James," Lyra said, her voice cutting through the quiet night. "I want to learn more. About Earth. About humans. I want to understand why things are the way they are." James smiled, surprised by the depth of her desire to learn. "What do you want to know?" he asked, leaning against the railing beside her. "Everything," she replied, her eyes sparkling with genuine curiosity. "How you live, how you think, how you make decisions." James thought for a moment. It wasn't an easy question to answer. "Well," he began slowly, "humans are complicated. We don't always get things right. We make mistakes, but we try to learn from them. We're always changing, always growing, even if it doesn't always feel that way." Lyra listened intently, her gaze fixed on him. "Do you think humans will ever stop making mistakes?" she asked. James let out a soft laugh. "I don't think so. But that's what makes us human. We stumble, we fall, but we keep going. We try again." Lyra nodded, absorbing his words. "I see," she said quietly. "It sounds like a lot of pain, but also a lot of hope." James didn't know how to respond at first. The way she described it made him think about things differently. For the first time, he realized how much pain had shaped humanity's path, but also how much hope had come from that pain. "Yeah," he said softly, "there's a lot of pain. But it's what we do with it that matters." There was a long silence as Lyra looked out over the landscape, her thoughts distant. James wasn't sure what she was thinking, but he had the feeling she was beginning to understand something important about humans. About him. "James," she said after a while, "I don't know how to thank you for everything. For showing me all of this. For making me feel like I belong." His heart swelled at her words. "You don't have to thank me," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. "You belong here, Lyra. You belong with me." Lyra turned to face him, her eyes soft and filled with something James couldn't quite place. But he knew that in that moment, they were both part of something bigger than themselves. They were no longer just two beings from different worlds. They were a family, in the truest sense of the word. And no matter what the future held, James knew they would face it together. There was still so much to learn, so much to understand. But for the first time in a long while, James didn't feel afraid. He felt hopeful. And as Lyra took his hand, he realized that maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The weeks that followed were filled with small moments of growth and discovery. James and Lyra had settled into a rhythm, a routine that felt both natural and comforting. Their bond had deepened, and each day they learned something new about each other. It was during one of these quiet mornings, as James was tending to some repairs around the house, that Lyra approached him with a question that had been brewing in her mind for days. "James," she said, her voice soft but determined, "how do humans deal with loss?" James paused in his work, his mind shifting from the task at hand to the unexpected question. He wiped his hands on his jeans before turning to face her, his expression serious. "Loss is hard," he began, his voice steady but tinged with a quiet sadness. "It's something we all go through. Some people try to bury it, others face it head on. But no matter what, it changes you." Lyra nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "I think I understand," she said quietly. "But how do you move on from it?" James took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "You don't ever really move on," he said. "You learn to live with it. The pain doesn't go away, but over time, you find ways to keep going. It's not about forgetting. It's about finding a new way to live in a world that's different." Lyra's eyes met his, and for a moment, they just stood there in silence, both of them grappling with their own experiences of loss. James, in his own way, had lost much, his past, his sense of purpose, but Lyra, too, had experienced something far more profound. She had lost everything, her home, her people, and the life she had once known. But in that moment, as they stood together, James realized that Lyra wasn't truly lost. She had found something new, something in him, in their shared journey, that had given her a sense of belonging again. "I don't know what will happen next, Lyra," James said, his voice gentle but firm. "But I do know that we're not alone. Not anymore." Lyra smiled, her expression softening as she stepped closer to him. "I know," she whispered, her voice full of quiet strength. "And I won't ever forget that." The days grew shorter, and the chill of autumn settled in. James and Lyra spent more time inside, finding comfort in the warmth of their home and the companionship they had forged. There was still much to learn, still much to explore, but they had found a peace they hadn't expected, a peace in each other. They spent hours talking about their worlds, about the differences that separated them and the things that brought them together. It was in these conversations that James truly understood just how much Lyra had changed. She was no longer the scared, lost alien girl who had stumbled into his life after the earthquake. She was a person with dreams, with hopes, and with a future. And James, for the first time in a long while, allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had a future too. One evening, as they sat in front of the fireplace, Lyra turned to James with a question that caught him off guard. "James, do you think we could find a way to make things better? For both of us?" James looked at her, the firelight casting shadows on her face. He thought about everything they had been through, everything they had shared. He had never imagined his life would take this turn, that he would find himself sitting here, in his home, with an alien girl who had become so much more than a stranger. "I think," he said slowly, his voice thoughtful, "that we already are." Lyra's eyes brightened, a look of understanding passing between them. For a brief moment, the weight of their pasts seemed to disappear, and all that remained was the connection they had built together. The future, uncertain as it was, seemed a little less daunting. Together, they would face it. Together, they would make it work. The winter months approached, bringing with them an even deeper sense of quiet. The air outside grew colder, and the nights stretched longer, but inside James' home, warmth thrived. He and Lyra had become a small, self-contained world, one that offered solace and safety in a time when both seemed so hard to come by. They spent their evenings in front of the fireplace, sharing stories from their respective worlds. For Lyra, Earth was a strange and beautiful place, full of oddities that fascinated her. She asked countless questions about everything from human history to the tiny details of daily life that James had long taken for granted. James, in turn, had started to look at his own world through new eyes. The little things, the changing seasons, the flicker of stars in the night sky, the quiet hum of life in his small town, suddenly seemed more precious. One evening, as they sat together, a rare quietness settled over them. James noticed that Lyra was gazing out the window, her expression distant, as though her mind was far away. "What's on your mind?" he asked, his voice soft. Lyra turned to him, her violet eyes thoughtful. "I was thinking about my people," she said, her voice quiet. "About what happened to us. About why we had to leave." James felt a pang in his chest. He knew her past was full of pain and loss, but hearing her speak of it so openly made it feel all the more real. He reached over and took her hand in his, offering a silent comfort. "You don't have to talk about it if you're not ready," he said gently. But Lyra shook her head, her gaze never leaving the window. "No," she said, her voice steady. I think I need to talk about it. I need to remember." James nodded, giving her the space she needed. "We were the last of our kind," Lyra continued, her voice barely a whisper. "Our world, it was dying. The resources were gone. The air became thick and unbreathable. We had no choice but to leave. Some of us survived, but not many. And the ones who did, well, they're scattered, lost." She paused, her hand tightening around his. "I never thought I'd find a place like this. A place where I could belong again." James squeezed her hand in return, his heart aching for her. "You found a place, Lyra," he said softly. "With me. With us." Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with a softness that made James' chest tighten. "And you found a place too," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "With me." They sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging between them. Outside, the wind howled, but inside, there was warmth. There was peace. And for the first time since Lyra had arrived, James realized just how much he had changed. He had always been a solitary man, someone who kept to himself, but now he felt like a part of something bigger. Lyra had become more than just a stranger from another world. She had become his family, and he knew, without a doubt, that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. As the days passed, they continued to learn from each other. Lyra's understanding of Earth deepened, and she began to find her own way. She had grown stronger, more confident, and James could see that she was no longer just surviving. She was living. And for James, that was enough. They didn't have all the answers, and the future was still uncertain. But as long as they had each other, That was all that mattered. Together, they would face whatever came next. As the first snowflakes of winter began to fall, James and Lyra found themselves facing a new chapter in their lives. The air was crisp, and the world around them had transformed into a quiet winter wonderland. The quiet beauty of the season mirrored the peace that had settled between them. They had come a long way from the first moment they had met, a time filled with uncertainty and fear. Now, as the days grew colder, their connection was undeniable. Lyra had become a part of James' world, and James had become a part of hers. They no longer simply shared a house, they shared a life. One evening, as they sat by the fire, Lyra spoke in a voice that was still soft but confident, a tone that James had come to recognize as a sign of her growing comfort with him. "James," she began, looking at the flames, "I've been thinking a lot about what you said before. About making things better. For both of us." James looked at her, his curiosity piqued. "What do you mean?" he asked. Lyra turned to face him, her violet eyes reflecting the flickering light. "I think it's time for me to go beyond just surviving," she said, her voice steady. "I want to do more. I want to be part of this world, not just someone who's trying to fit in. I want to help. I want to learn how to live fully, not just how to live in a way that keeps me safe." James smiled softly, feeling a surge of pride. "You've come a long way, Lyra," he said, his voice full of admiration. "You've always been more than just a survivor. You've always had something special in you." Lyra looked down, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee mug. "I never realized it before," she said quietly, "but I think this is what I needed all along. Not just safety or survival, but connection, purpose." The words hung in the air between them, and James felt a warmth in his chest. "You already have that," he said, his voice low but full of sincerity. "You found a place here with me." Lyra's eyes met his, a gentle smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "And I'm grateful for that," she whispered. The night stretched on, and they continued to talk, sharing their hopes, their fears, and their dreams. It was the kind of conversation that felt like it could last forever, a perfect moment of understanding. As they sat together, James realized that in helping Lyra, he had found his own sense of purpose as well. He wasn't just helping her heal. She was helping him find a new direction in his life, one that was full of possibility and promise. The future was still uncertain, but in that moment, it didn't matter. They had each other, and together, they would face whatever came next, one step at a time. The world outside may have been cold and harsh, but inside, there was warmth. There was peace. There was love. And that was enough.